In 2006, a marine biologist named Garrett Vane published a paper arguing that a species the world believed had been extinct for over 3 million years was still alive in the deep ocean. The paper passed peer review. It appeared in a respected journal, and within 4 months it had been retracted, his funding pulled, and his name turned into a punchline that ended careers when attached to them. What almost no one noticed in the rush to bury the man was that nothing in the paper was ever actually proven wrong. To understand how a scientist with real evidence ended up giving talks in half-empty rooms above highway motels, you have to understand the kind of man Garrett Vane was before any of this, and he was not an easy man to like. Vane was, by nearly every account, brilliant and insufferable in equal measure. He was a specialist in shark physiology, with a reputation for being the most feared reviewer in his field. When a paper landed on his desk for peer review, careers held their breath. He had a particular contempt for what he called the believers, the amateurs, the cryptid hunters, the people who saw a sea monster in every blurry photograph. He had spent 20 years debunking exactly those claims, often cruelly, often in print, and he had made a long list of enemies doing it. The irony that would define the rest of his life is this: the one time Garrett Vane decided something impossible was real, he had already taught an entire profession to enjoy watching him fall. It began with a sample. In 2005, a commercial trawler working deep water brought up a section of damaged netting, along with part of what had been caught in it. Tangled in the cable was a tooth. The crew assumed it was a fossil dredged off the bottom, and one of them kept it as a curiosity. It passed through a few hands before it reached Vane, who was shown it almost as a joke. Look at the size of this old fossil. He was expected to glance at it and confirm it was 1,000,000 years dead. He did not. The first thing that stopped him was the color. People who only know Megalodon teeth from museum cases expect them black, and this is the most common objection raised against any claim like this one. A real tooth, the argument goes, would be a dark mineralized fossil, not something from a living animal. But that misunderstands why old teeth are dark. They do not turn black from age alone. They turn dark from mineral staining, from the chemistry of deep, cold water soaking into them over a life lived far below the surface. A tooth from an animal living right now in the deep would carry that same staining while still being structurally fresh, not fossilized, stained, and the moment Vane looked closely, he saw the difference. The staining was there, the fossilization was not. The structure was intact, organic, recent. That should have been the start of a careful, private investigation. For most scientists, it would have been. But Vane was not most scientists, and here the first of his fatal traits came into play. He could not resist being right in public. He ran the analysis properly. He measured the serration pattern and found it too fine and too even for any living shark. He tested the mineral content and found the signature of deep ocean water, the chemistry of the seafloor far below the range of any normal survey. He compared the shape against every living species and eliminated them one by one, and then he did the thing he had spent his career mocking other people for doing. He compared it against the fossil record, and it matched a single species, Otodus megalodon, the largest predatory shark that ever lived, rebuilt by science from teeth and vertebrae to the length of a small whale, with a jaw capable of a bite force many times that of a great white. A species every textbook agrees vanished around 3.5 million years ago. The textbooks also explain why it vanished. The oceans cooled, the argument runs, and a warm water animal lost the shallow seas it depended on. But Vane noticed the flaw his field had been comfortable ignoring for a century. That entire conclusion rests on where megalodon teeth have been found, and teeth are only found where geologists actually dig. The deep ocean floor has barely been sampled at all. If a population of these animals had followed the cold and the prey downward as the surface cooled, adapting to the deep instead of dying with the shallows, their teeth would settle on a seabed no survey has ever touched. The absence of evidence in a place no one has ever looked is not evidence of absence. The cold water objection, the one thrown at every story like this, was never a fact. It was an assumption about where the teeth happened to fall. Vane wrote all of this into a paper, and then he made the decision that destroyed him. He submitted it under his own name, framed not as a cautious hypothesis, but as a conclusion. He was so certain, so used to being the smartest man in any room, that he did not anticipate what happens when you hand your enemies a reason to end you. The paper passed peer review, which tells you the science was sound. It was published. And for about a week, there was a stunned silence. Then the silence broke, and not the way Vane expected. Nobody engaged with his data. That is the detail that matters, and the one almost everyone forgets. The serration analysis was never disproven. The mineral chemistry was never explained away. The species elimination was never challenged on its merits. Instead, the field did to Vane exactly what Vane had spent 20 years doing to others. They attacked the man. The reviewer, who had humiliated dozens of colleagues, was suddenly the subject of every story they had been waiting to tell. He was unstable. He had always been arrogant. He had clearly lost his judgment. The same arrogance that made him untouchable became the weapon that buried him, swung by the people he had taught to swing it. The journal retracted the paper within 4 months. The stated reason was not that the science was wrong. It was concerns regarding the extraordinary nature of the claim and the reputational risk to the publication. Read that carefully, because it is the whole story. They did not retract it for being false. They retracted it for being embarrassing. His funding followed within the year, and his name became the example professors used to teach students what happens when belief overrides discipline. Which brings us to the questions Vane could never get anyone to answer. If he was so obviously wrong, why did no one ever publish the rebuttal? Why did no one take his sample and demonstrate the flaw? And here the people who dismiss these stories raise their best objection. If these animals were real, there would have to be enough of them to breed, and we would be finding whales bitten in half on beaches around the world. Vane's answer, buried in the paper nobody read past the title, was the strongest part of all of it. We may be looking at the very last of them, a deep water animal, slow to mature and extraordinarily long-lived, in numbers low enough that a remnant population could persist in unmapped water for an immense span of time. They do not hunt at the surface where we would see them. What they kill in the deep stays in the deep. Sinking into thousands of feet of water, no carcass ever rises from. We do not find the evidence because it sinks into the one part of the ocean we have decided is empty. There was one more thing in the paper, mentioned almost in passing, that should have mattered more than anything else. Vane had not been the only one to examine the sample. Before publishing, he had sent a section of it to a younger researcher at another institution for an independent opinion, partly to protect himself, partly out of the old habit of expecting to be challenged. That researcher confirmed everything: the staining, the structure, the impossibility of it being a fossil. But when the storm broke and Vane became radioactive, the younger scientists did the rational thing for a career. They stayed quiet. They let it be forgotten. And the one piece of independent corroboration that could have changed the conversation went into a drawer, because being associated with Garrett Vane had become professionally fatal. Vane spent the last decade of his working life outside the institutions that had made him. He gave talks to small audiences, the same kind he had once sneered at, the believers and the curious, and the people who had always wanted the ocean to be larger and stranger than the textbooks allowed. He was, by the accounts of those who saw him, not bitter exactly, but something quieter and worse. a man who had been right, and who had learned that being right is not the same as being believed, and that the difference is decided by whether people can stand to look at you. He died still insisting the sample was real. The tooth itself passed out of his possession in those final years, and its location is no longer certain. The younger researcher who confirmed it has never spoken publicly. The paper remains in the record, retracted, with a note explaining that it was withdrawn, though not, if you read closely, that it was ever proven wrong. And the deep water Vane spent his ruined career pointing at is still there, still unmapped, still cold, still holding whatever it holds. Whatever left that tooth in a trawler's net, in water no survey has ever reached, is, by every indication, still down there, in the dark. In the part of the ocean we have decided, against all the evidence, is empty. The man who tried to tell us is gone. The thing he tried to tell us about is not. If you have seen something in the water that you could not explain, something too large, too deep, too old for the ocean you thought you knew, we want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. Subscribe to my channel for more accounts from the deep.